Tesco made £2.3 billion in profit last year. And every single penny came out of your kitchen. Not because food got more expensive, because 3 generations of British cooks forgot 30 techniques that their grandparents used every single day without thinking twice. Techniques that turned cheap ingredients into meals nobody would believe came from a budget. Techniques that made a single chicken feed a family for 3 days. Techniques that professional chefs still use right now in London kitchens, charging you £28 a plate for the privilege. I spent 6 months researching the cooking habits of post-war British households, talking to butchers, bakers, food historians, and 80-year-old women who still refuse to buy a jar of sauce. What I found is that the average British family is overspending on groceries by somewhere between £40 and £80 a week, not because they're buying luxury items, but because they've been slowly, deliberately taught to forget how a kitchen actually works. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through 30 practical, tested kitchen techniques that can cut your weekly food spend nearly in half. These are not diet hacks. These are not influencer meal prep gimmicks. These are the real, working methods that fed Britain through rationing, through recessions, and through decades when nobody had the option of popping to Tesco for a bag of pre-grated cheese. But there's a part of this story almost nobody talks about. There's a reason we forgot these skills, and it wasn't an accident. Let's start with the single most important thing your grandmother did differently from you. She bought the whole chicken. A whole chicken at Morrison's cost £3.89. 4 chicken breasts from the same store cost $5.50. 2 thighs cost $2.30. Drumsticks cost $1.80. Add that up, and you're paying nearly £10 for the same bird you could have bought intact for under $4. Your grandmother never bought chicken portions. She bought the bird, and she broke it down in about 5 minutes with a decent pair of kitchen scissors. Breast fillets come off in 2 cuts. Legs twist free at the joint. Thighs separate from drumsticks in seconds. You end up with 4 portions of white meat, 4 of dark, and a carcass. That carcass is where the real money is. Drop it in a pot with an onion, a carrot end, some peppercorns, and cold water. Simmer it for an hour. You now have 2 liters of proper chicken stock that the supermarket would charge you $1.35 per carton for. Freeze it in ice cube trays and you've got flavor ammunition for gravies, risottos, soups, and pasta sauces for weeks. Master this one habit, buying the whole bird, and you're saving £6 to £8 every single week without eating any differently. That's over £350 a year from one change. If you grew up watching someone break down a chicken at the kitchen counter, tell me in the comments where you're from. I want to see how far this tradition actually reached. Now here's where most people stop. They learn to buy the whole chicken and they think they've cracked the code. But the real savings in a British kitchen don't come from what you buy. They come from what you do with the cheap stuff after you get it home. And nothing proves that more than what happens with a block of butter and some flour. Cold butter makes better pastry. Every baker in Britain knows this. But here's what the recipe books don't tell you. Cutting cold butter into cubes and rubbing it into flour takes 10 minutes and still leaves warm patches from your hands. Your body heat is working against you the entire time. The trick that bakery workers have used for decades is absurdly simple. Put your butter in the freezer for 20 minutes. Pull it out and grate it directly into the flour using a standard cheese grater, tossing the shreds in as you go. 2 minutes. Done. Perfectly even, ice-cold fat particles distributed throughout the mix before your hands have warmed anything. The result is pastry that's consistently shorter, flakier, and more tender than anything the rubbing method produces. This works for scones too. Frozen butter grated into scone mix produces a rise that pastry school students spend 3 terms trying to achieve. Your Nan didn't go to pastry school. She just kept her butter cold. And while we're in the baking realm, ice water. Every recipe tells you to use cold water. What they don't tell you is that ice water is dramatically better. Fill a glass, drop in 3 ice cubes, and use that water in your pastry. The temperature keeps the fat solid longer, giving you more working time. Your Cornish pasties, your pies, your tarts all transformed by something you already have in your freezer. But most people don't even get to the pastry stage because they've been convinced it's too hard. They buy pre-rolled pastry sheets for £2.50 when the ingredients for a batch cost about 40 pence. That's a £2.10 convenience tax on flour, butter, and water. And speaking of convenience taxes, this next one might be the most outrageous of all. Panko breadcrumbs from the supermarket cost $1.85 for 200 grams. The bread you forgot to finish last week costs nothing because you've already paid for it. Any stale bread, not moldy, just stale blitzed in a food processor, spread on a tray, dried in a low oven at 120 degrees for 20 minutes, and stored in a jar. These breadcrumbs coat chicken, top a gratin, bind fish cakes, and finish a pasta bake. A bag of stale crusts produces enough to last a fortnight. The supermarket is literally selling you something you're already throwing away. Stop throwing it away. Now here's where the money really starts adding up. And this is the chapter that professional caterers don't want you to know about. 1 pound of beef mince from Aldi costs about $3.20 and feeds 4 people at a push. But add 50 grams of dry rolled oats to that mince before you brown it for your bolognese, your cottage pie, your chili, and it suddenly feeds 6 comfortably. The oats absorb liquid during cooking, swell to almost nothing visible, and take on the flavor of the meat entirely. Nobody can taste them. What they do taste is a richer, denser, more satisfying sauce that holds together better on the plate. At roughly 40 pence for a 500-gram bag of oats, you're adding pennies and removing the need to buy an extra pack of mince. Professional caterers have used this technique for decades. School dinner ladies in the 70s and 80s stretched mince this way every single day, feeding hundreds of children on budgets that would make a modern meal prep influencer weep. But the real magician's trick with cheap meat is one that Chinese restaurant kitchens have been using for 40 years while British home cooks remain completely in the dark. Bicarbonate of soda. Take the cheapest stewing beef you can find. Slice it thin. Toss it with a 1/4 teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda and a splash of water. Leave it for 20 minutes. Then rinse. The alkaline environment breaks down muscle proteins before cooking even starts. That tough, chewy braising steak now stir-fries in 2 minutes and comes out as tender as cuts, costing 3 times as much. A kilo of braising steak at 7 pounds per kilo produces the same result as sirloin at 22 pounds per kilo. The science behind this was confirmed by food researchers at Kiel University, but your local Chinese takeaway has known it since the 1980s. And it gets better. Remember that yogurt sitting in your fridge? A 500-gram pot of full-fat Greek yogurt costs £1. Double cream costs $1.10 for 300 milliliters and goes half as far. In most hot sauce applications, a chicken korma, a pasta sauce, a stroganoff yogurt performs identically to cream once it's stirred in off the heat. The keywords being off the heat. Yogurt splits if you boil it. Stir it into your sauce once the pan has come off the hob, and the result is creamy, rich, and nearly indistinguishable from the double cream version. I'd argue yogurt actually makes a better korma than cream does. That slight tang adds something that plain fat simply can't. Fight me in the comments if you disagree, but try it first. And while we're on protein chicken thighs, the most underrated cut in the British supermarket, cheaper than breasts, more flavorful than breasts, and harder to overcook than breasts. A pack of 8 bone-in thighs from Aldi costs roughly $3.50. They respond to marinade in a way that chicken breasts simply cannot, because the higher fat content carries flavor deep into the meat. A marinade of yogurt, lemon, garlic, and cumin costs about 20 pence to make. Leave the thighs in it overnight. Roast at 200 degrees for 35 minutes. What lands on the table tastes like something from a proper restaurant kitchen. People pay £14 for a quarter chicken at Nando's. You've just made 8 thighs for $3.70. What did your family call the cheap chicken dinner growing up? Everyone seems to have had a different name for it. Drop yours in the comments. I'm collecting these. And one more technique before we move on that turns kitchen scraps into liquid gold. Every time you roast anything, a chicken, a tray of vegetables, a joint, pour the pan drippings into an ice cube tray and freeze. Every time you make stock, reduce it until it's intensely flavored and syrupy. Then freeze that in cubes too. Each frozen cube is worth approximately 1.5 commercial stock cubes in flavor. The salt is entirely under your control. A box of Knorr cubes costs $1.20 for 8 cubes of compressed, dehydrated, oversalted powder. You can do better with your own kitchen scraps for free. Now, this is the chapter that genuinely changed how I think about my own kitchen, because we're not talking about buying cheaper food anymore. We're talking about eating the food you've already bought and paid for the parts you're currently throwing in the bin. Every household in Britain throws away approximately 1.4 million bananas every single day. A banana that's gone too ripe to eat, too sweet, too soft, brown spots everywhere. Most people bin it without a second thought. But a frozen, overripe banana, blended, becomes ice cream. Not a simulation. Not a sad, healthy substitute. Actual, scoopable, creamy, frozen dessert that tastes of intense banana with a texture nearly identical to soft serve. 2 frozen bananas blended with a tablespoon of peanut butter and a splash of milk produce a pudding that would cost $4.50 at a restaurant and costs you the price of 2 bananas you were about to throw away. Add a square of dark chocolate. 15 pence for a dessert that makes children stop asking for magnums. The stems of broccoli contain more nutrients per gram than the florets, and you've been paying for them every time you buy a head of broccoli. Peeled and sliced thin, they stir-fry in 2 minutes and taste almost identical to the florets. Carrot tops those green tufts everyone tears off and bins blanched for 30 seconds and used as a herb. They add a fresh, slightly mineral flavor to soups and pestos. Celery leaves are more intensely flavored than the stalks, and they're brilliant in stocks and salads. You are buying these parts of the vegetable every single week. You are paying good money for them, and then you are walking them to the bin. And then there's the heel of the loaf. Every loaf of bread produces 2 heels that the majority of British households quietly discard or leave in the bag until they go moldy. A heel is structurally identical to any other slice. The only difference is a slightly higher ratio of crust, which, for toast, sandwiches, and soldiers, matters not at all. 2 wasted heels per loaf represent roughly 10% of that loaf going in the bin every week. Over a year, you're throwing away the equivalent of about 8 full loaves, roughly 11 pounds worth of bread for absolutely no reason. Eat the heels, or make them into breadcrumbs. They are bread. You paid for bread. Raise your hand if your family had the heel debate. Growing up, someone in the house refused to eat them. Someone else insisted. Actually, type the hand raise emoji in the comments. I want to see how many households this tore apart. 10. Chapter 5. The Saturday Evening Club. This next technique is the single most powerful money-saving habit in the British kitchen, and it's simultaneously the least practiced. It comes in 2 parts, and together they can genuinely transform your monthly food budget overnight. Part 1. Buy your protein at closing time on Saturday. Every major British supermarket, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Morrison's, Waitrose reduces fresh meat, fish, and prepared foods by 30 to 75% in the hours before closing on Saturday evening and Sunday morning. The yellow stickers start appearing 2 to 3 hours before the doors shut. Chicken, salmon, mince, steak, sausages, whole joints, all marked down to fractions of their shelf price because the store needs them gone before the Monday morning delivery arrives. A family that shops this window once a week can cut their protein spend by 40% without changing what they eat at all. Buy more than you need and freeze what you won't use that day. Part 2. Batch cook and freeze in portions. A homemade bolognese sauce made in a single large pot. 10 portions costs about 12 pounds in ingredients and 40 minutes of your time. 5 of those portions, frozen individually, equal 5 ready meals. The Tesco equivalent ready meal costs between $2.50 and $3.50 per portion. 5 ready meals cost at least 15 pounds. You've spent 3 pounds less and eaten dramatically better food. Scale this across the week. Cook once at the weekend. Eat 5 times during the week. The freezer is not a graveyard for forgotten food. It is a money-making machine that only works if you use it deliberately. A freezer full of protein bought at the Saturday reductions is worth more to a British household budget than any meal kit subscription, any loyalty card scheme, and any voucher the supermarket has ever printed. They are essentially paying you to shop at inconvenient times, so show up at inconvenient times. If you've ever done the Saturday yellow sticker run, I need to hear your best find. Drop it in the comments. I once heard from someone who got an entire leg of lamb for £2.40. I still think about it. Now most people, when they hear cooking on a budget, they picture bland food, boiled vegetables, and unseasoned chicken breasts. And this is exactly why the final group of techniques matters so much, because they prove that flavor has almost nothing to do with what you spend and almost everything to do with what you know. Let's start with something you pour down the drain every single night: pasta water. Every time you drain pasta into the sink, you're throwing away the single best sauce ingredient in your kitchen. That water is starchy, slightly salty, and it emulsifies fat and liquid together in a way that nothing else does. Before you drain, ladle out a full mug. When your sauce is ready, add 2 or 3 tablespoons and stir. The sauce will cling to every strand instead of pooling at the bottom of the bowl. Professional Italian kitchens treat pasta water like gold. British home cooks drain it straight down the plug hole and wonder why their bolognese doesn't taste like the restaurant version. Now toast your spices before using them. A small jar of cumin costs $1.50. Used straight from the jar, it gives a baseline warmth to a curry. But toasted dry in a heavy pan for 60 seconds before you grind it or add it, something remarkable happens. The volatile oils activate. The flavor deepens by a factor that experienced cooks can smell from the next room. The practical result? You need half as much. A teaspoon of toasted cumin delivers what 2 teaspoons of untoasted cumin cannot. Your $1.50 jar now lasts twice as long. Every spice in your cupboard responds to dry toasting. Coriander, cardamom, fennel, black pepper, smoked paprika. The technique costs no extra time once it becomes a habit. You're not buying better spices. You're just using the ones you already have properly. Here's another one that costs literally nothing. Salt your aubergines. Aubergines are one of the best value vegetables in Britain, about 65 pence each. Filling, meaty, brilliant in curries and pasta bakes. But most people cook them wrong and find them bitter and oily. Slice them, lay them on a tea towel, salt them generously, and leave for 30 minutes. The salt draws out bitter moisture through osmosis. Pat them dry before cooking. 2 things happen. The bitterness disappears entirely, and because the cells have released their water, the aubergine absorbs far less oil during frying. Your dish is lighter, and your bottle of oil lasts twice as long. 1 vegetable, 1 technique, 2 problems solved. Now let me tell you something about salt that will change your Sunday roasts forever. Most people season their joint right before it goes in the oven, or they don't season it at all. The dry brine method changes everything. Salt your chicken or beef the night before and leave it uncovered in the fridge overnight. The salt draws moisture to the surface. Then the meat reabsorbs it, pulling the seasoning deep into the muscle. The skin or fat cap dries out completely. When that joint goes into the hot oven, the outside crisps faster, and the inside stays juicier longer. No basting, no covering with foil, no adding stock to keep it from drying out. Just patience and a night in the fridge. And here's the part that really matters. Cheaper cuts respond to this even better than expensive ones. The same principle works spectacularly with pork chops. Supermarkets charge a significant premium for anything that's been brined or marinated before it reaches the shelf. Brined pork chops at Waitrose cost $6.50 for 4. Plain pork chops cost $3.20 for 4. The brine is water, salt, sugar, and sometimes herbs. Making your own takes 3 minutes. Dissolve 3 tablespoons of salt and 1 tablespoon of sugar in 1 liter of cold water. Submerge the chops and refrigerate for at least 4 hours. The brine penetrates all the way through and keeps the meat moist during cooking. Brined pork does not dry out. Plain pork dries out almost immediately. You're paying $3.30 for water, salt, sugar, and time. Give yourself the time. Keep the $3.30. And here's a technique that explains why restaurants charge £28 for a flat iron steak. The reverse sear. Flat iron costs about £8 a kilo. Put the steak in a 120-degree oven on a rack for 20 to 25 minutes until the internal temperature reaches 52 degrees. Then sear it in a screaming hot cast iron pan for 60 seconds per side. Edge to edge, perfect medium rare, with a thick, dark, flavorful crust that a standard pan fry can never produce. No gray band, no overcooked ring around the outside. Buy cheaper steak. Cook it better. Which brings me to the most misunderstood truth in the British kitchen. Brisket costs $4.50 a kilo. Sirloin costs $22. Slow cook that brisket at 90 degrees for 8 hours with an onion, a carrot, and half a tin of tomatoes, and you get a result that makes dinner guests assume you spent 4 times what you actually did. The collagen in tough cuts brisket, shin, cheek, oxtail melts into gelatin during long, slow cooking. It creates a sauce that's naturally thick, glossy, and rich without adding anything to it. A slow cooker from Argos costs $19.99 and pays for itself within a month. The cuts that work best in it are always the cheapest ones in the butcher's counter. This is not a compromise. This is the superior cooking method for the cheaper product, producing the objectively better result. Think about that for a second. The most delicious version of beef you can make at home uses the cut that costs the least. The expensive cuts are for speed. The cheap cuts are for flavor. We've had it backwards for decades. And one more before we move on, because this one will save you money at the lunchbox stage. Lemon juice. A simple squeeze of lemon over any cut fruit or vegetable does exactly what the supermarket's citric acid treatment does on their pre-cut produce. Sliced apples for a lunchbox? Squeeze of lemon. And 3 hours later, they're still white. Pre-cut apple slices cost $1.60, when a whole apple costs 25 pence. Every time you buy pre-cut anything, you're paying a premium for a 10-second task. Do the task yourself. Buy the whole fruit. This is the part where everyone over 40 is nodding their head right now. Your parents knew all of this. The question is why you don't. Now here's where the story takes a turn that most people never see coming. Everything I've described so far, every single one of these 30 techniques was common knowledge in Britain until roughly the late 1970s. Your grandmother didn't learn these tricks from a cookbook or a YouTube video. She absorbed them the way you absorb language, by being in the kitchen while her mother cooked. So, what happened? Why did 3 generations of British families forget skills that had been passed down for centuries? The answer is not lazy parenting or cultural decline. The answer is money. Specifically, other people's money. In the early 1980s, British supermarkets underwent a transformation that food historians now call the convenience revolution. Tesco, Sainsbury's, and the emerging discounters realized something that would reshape the entire British food economy. The profit margin on raw ingredients is tiny. The margin on processed, pre-prepared, and convenience format versions of those same ingredients is enormous. A whole chicken at $3.89 earns the supermarket pennies, but 4 pre-portioned chicken breasts at $5.50 earns them pounds. A block of cheddar at $1.65 makes them almost nothing. But a bag of pre-grated cheddar at $2.10 for less cheese, coated in anti-caking agents that make it worse at melting, that's pure profit. The supermarket industry spent decades and millions in marketing to convince British households that certain basic kitchen tasks were inconvenient, difficult, or not worth your time. Grating cheese, tearing lettuce, breaking down a chicken, soaking oats overnight, brining a pork chop. Tasks that take seconds were repackaged as problems that needed solving, and the solution always cost more. Bagged salad is the most extraordinary example. A 100-gram bag of mixed leaves costs £1. It's 95% water. You are paying £1 for approximately 5 grams of actual leaf material. A whole iceberg lettuce costs 49 pence and lasts a week. The pre-washed mixed leaf industry made £340 million in Britain last year. Their entire marketing budget is aimed at making you feel that tearing your own lettuce is an inconvenience. Tearing a lettuce takes 45 seconds. You are paying 51 pence for those 45 seconds every single time. And it goes deeper than convenience. Take sausages. Sausage manufacturers spent considerable money in the 1990s lobbying for regulations that allowed more water content in British sausages. They won. The sausage got cheaper to make. The price did not go down. Premium pork sausages cost $4.50 per kilo for a product that's roughly half pork. The rest is breadcrumbs, water, and a casing that contributes nothing to the flavor of a toad in the hole. Premium pork mince costs $2.80 per kilo and is 100% pork. Shape it yourself with a pinch of fennel, sage, salt, and white pepper. 90 seconds. Full flavor, no filler. You've paid for meat, not bread. Pre-grated cheese costs approximately 30% more per gram than a block of the same cheese. And that's before you factor in the anti-caking agents and cellulose coating that make pre-grated cheese slightly worse at melting. A block of mature cheddar from Lidl costs $1.65 for 400 grams. An equivalent bag of pre-grated costs $2.10 for 350 grams less cheese for more money. If your family goes through 2 bags a week, you're spending £219 a year more than you need to. Buy the block, grate it yourself, freeze what you grate in a bag, and it stays loose and usable straight from the freezer for months. 1 box grater, 1 habit change, £219 back in your pocket. Fresh herb packets cost up to $1.20 each, and most of the pack wilts and gets binned within 4 days. The annual cost of throwing away supermarket herb packets in the average British household runs to somewhere between £80 and £150 a year. The herb industry knows this. They've lobbied for prominent placement near checkouts for decades. The solution takes about 10 minutes of your time once. Buy a basil plant, a mint plant, a parsley plant, and a chives plant from the garden center. About $1.50 each. Put them on your windowsill. Water them twice a week. They will outlast 100 supermarket packets and provide more herb than you can use. Then there's milk powder, a trick straight from rationing that still works brilliantly. A 2-liter bottle of semi-skimmed from Asda costs $1.25 and lasts a week. A 400-gram bag of dried skimmed milk powder from the same store costs $2.20 and makes roughly 40 liters of milk equivalent when reconstituted. For any baking application, scones, pancakes, cakes, white sauce, custard, reconstituted powder performs identically to fresh. The flavor difference is negligible once it hits heat. Your grandmother used milk powder during rationing and kept using it afterwards because it worked and it kept. The fresh milk is for cups of tea. For everything that goes in the oven, Powder works just as well at a fraction of the cost. And while we're talking about what you put in drinks, oat milk. Oatly costs $1.40 per liter. A kilogram bag of rolled oats costs $1.90. 1 liter of oat milk requires roughly 100 grams of oats, 11 pence worth. Blend 100 grams of oats with 1 liter of cold water for 30 seconds. Strain through a tea towel. Refrigerate. Done. The result is oat milk, with none of the rapeseed oil and gum additives that commercial versions contain. If your household uses 2 liters a week, that's 134 pounds a year for the privilege of someone else blending oats and water. The supermarket didn't just sell us convenience. It sold us incompetence. And the price tag was hidden in every weekly shop for 40 years. Okay, I need to settle something. Which is the bigger ripoff, pre-grated cheese or bagged salad? I've got my answer. Drop yours in the comments. This might start a war, and I'm here for it. Now I want to tell you a story that puts everything we've discussed into human terms. Because statistics and price comparisons are useful, but they don't capture what it actually feels like to cook this way. In 2008, a woman named Margaret Bevan in Pontypridd, South Wales, was 74 years old and living on a state pension of about £130 a week. Her daughter, worried about her mother's nutrition, offered to set up a weekly Tesco delivery. Margaret refused. Every Saturday morning, Margaret walked to the Pontypridd Indoor Market, a market that's been running since 1890, and she bought a whole chicken, a bag of root vegetables, a block of cheese, a dozen eggs, a tin of golden syrup, whatever fruit was cheapest that morning, and a bag of oats. Her weekly food spend was between 12 and 15 pounds. For one person, eating 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. Margaret would break the chicken down on Saturday afternoon. The breasts went into a Monday pie with leeks from a neighbor's garden, topped with pastry she made with frozen grated butter. The legs got roasted Tuesday with whatever root vegetables she had, seasoned with salt the night before. Wednesday was a curry made from the remaining dark meat, flavored with spices she dry toasted in the same heavy cast-iron pan her mother had used. The carcass simmered into stock that became Thursday's soup, thick, golden, and rich enough to be a meal on its own with bread. Friday was egg and chips or a cheese omelet. Weekend leftovers got stretched with oats and breadcrumbs into whatever form the fridge demanded. Her daughter, who lived in Bristol and shopped at Waitrose, spent £70 a week feeding herself and her husband, almost 5 times as much per person, and ate worse. She told a reporter from the South Wales Echo in 2012 that her mother could make a meal out of thin air, and that she'd never once tasted a ready meal growing up. Margaret didn't think of herself as a skilled cook. She thought of herself as normal. She'd learned everything from her mother, who'd learned from hers, who'd been cooking through the 1940s, when rationing made waste a kind of sin. What Margaret had, and what her generation carried, was not talent. It was knowledge, passed down so seamlessly that nobody thought of it as knowledge at all. It was just what you did. Margaret passed away in 2016. Her daughter told the same reporter that cleaning out her mother's kitchen, she found a single shelf of spices, cumin, coriander, paprika, turmeric, black pepper, and dried chili flakes, a block of butter in the freezer, a jar of homemade breadcrumbs, a pot of dripping saved from Sunday's roast, an ice cube tray of frozen stock in deep amber. No jar sauces, no pre-grated anything, no sachets, no packets, just a kitchen that still knew how to work. That shelf of spices, that freezer, that dripping pot that's a 2,000-pound-a-year saving system disguised as a normal kitchen. And it ran on nothing more than 30 techniques that nobody bothered to write down because everyone already knew them. If you had someone like Margaret in your family, a grandmother, an aunt, a neighbor who could make something out of nothing, tell me about them in the comments. I think those stories matter more than any of the numbers I've shared today. And here's the part that caught me off guard. I expected this to be a story about loss, about skills that vanished, and a generation left unable to feed itself cheaply. And for 20 years, that was exactly the story. But something shifted around 2020. The pandemic forced millions of British households back into their kitchens properly, daily, with no option to order Deliveroo, and for the first time in decades, people started asking questions their grandparents could have answered in their sleep. How do you make stock? How do you stretch mince? What do you do with a whole chicken? The cost of living crisis that followed accelerated it further. Suddenly, the question wasn't philosophical. It was financial. And the answers, it turned out, hadn't disappeared. They'd just been waiting. In 2023, searches for how to break down a whole chicken on YouTube were up 400% compared to 2019. Sales of dried oats outpaced instant porridge sachets for the first time in a decade. Slow cooker sales hit a 10-year high. Indoor herb gardens became one of the fastest-growing product categories on Amazon UK. The knowledge your grandmother had isn't lost. It's being rediscovered frantically, urgently, by a generation that just realized the supermarket sold them an expensive lie for 40 years. And here's the thing that ties this entire story together in a way I didn't expect. The 30 techniques we've covered today, not a single one requires you to buy anything new. Not a special gadget, not an expensive ingredient, not a subscription to a meal service. Every one of them works with what's already in your kitchen right now, today. The most expensive ingredient in your weekly shop isn't the chicken or the cheese or the mince. It's the knowledge you were never given, and you just got it for free. Tesco made £2.3 billion last year. That number is built on pre-grated cheese and bagged salad and portioned chicken breasts and instant porridge sachets and jars of sauce and ready meals and every other product that exists because someone, somewhere, decided it was easier to sell us the solution than to teach us the skill. But a kitchen is a tool. The people who used it best were the ones who understood exactly what it could do. And now, so do you. A whole chicken broken down in 5 minutes. Frozen butter grated into flour. A splash of pasta water that transforms a sauce. Oats stirred into mince. A broccoli stem that's been hiding in plain sight. A slow cooker turning the cheapest cut in the shop into the best meal you've ever made. Yellow stickers on a Saturday evening. A jar of breadcrumbs from bread you nearly threw away. A pork chop that sat in salt water overnight and came out tasting like it cost 3 times what it did. 30 techniques. 0 new purchases. And somewhere, right now, a woman like Margaret Bevan would look at all of this and shrug. Because to her, it was never a trick. It was just cooking. Try number 1 this Saturday. Just show up at your local supermarket at 7 in the evening and look at those yellow stickers. Then come back and tell me what you found. Here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to hear your answer. What's the one kitchen skill you wish someone had taught you years ago? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this is the kind of video that makes you think differently about something you do every day, subscribe. I've got a video coming about the lost British traditions that saved families thousands, and the kitchen is just the beginning. Speaking of traditions we've forgotten, you should see what I found about the way British households used to preserve food before refrigerators. That story goes places you won't believe.